Aloha and welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Lynette Cruz. I'm your host for this program. This is a show that's sponsored by Kaleimaileali'i Hawaiian Civic Club with funding from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and thank you, Oha. I'm happy to have you join us tonight. My guest is Lorenz Gonscher, and I was going to say doctor, but not yet. Pretty soon.
Not yet.
Pretty soon, Dr. Lorenz.
Hopefully.
And the reason I asked Lorenz here is because he has been doing research about Pacific and Hawaii in the Pacific, and most of us know, zero. That's the truth. I don't know anything about Hawaii in the Pacific, and that's one of the reasons I thought you might be really good to share the information that you already have, basically from both your master's and your ongoing data collection for your dissertation. Yes. So, Lorenz, I'm not going to introduce you other than to say that I met you, I don't know how many years ago, at Iolani Palace in the dark at some event. Must have been a Ku'e event. I don't remember, but it was many years ago. So welcome and tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Lynette. Thank you for hosting me here tonight. Okay, so yeah, let me start by introducing myself. Aloha mai kako. My name is Lorenz Gonscher. I am originally from Germany. I was born and raised there, and came to Hawaii, I think it's 11 years ago now, so I think it was probably close after shortly after my arrival that we met, probably, so it was probably 11 years ago. Short intro, I guess people might wonder what does this German guy do in the Pacific, and why does this German guy write all this stuff about Hawaii in the Pacific. So, okay, well, long story short, I've been really interested in Pacific Island history, culture. That was my thing from my teenage years on. I was just fascinated with that. I guess, whatever you want to call it, quest for adventure, exotic stuff, whatever. But I got really deeply into it, to the point where it's just not just exoticness, but really I wanted to know everything about history, culture, everything. So I started after my high school. I started studying anthropology in Germany with a focus on the Pacific Islands. And of course, I soon noticed that it was kind of, doing this from Germany is kind of hard. So I needed to go in the Pacific, actually, in the region.
That helps, yeah.
And I had previously traveled to both Tahiti and Hawaii already. So I knew a little bit of that. I had been also in from that first trip already, I had known some of the pro-independence activist people in Tahiti. But also I met Dr. Kikuni Blaisdell on this first trip already, because of the Tahitian friends of mine who gave me his address. So I was kind of already aware of much of this. And then so I figured where should I go to study? I guess Tahiti and Hawaii were my both kind of focus areas, and then I figured Hawaii has has big opportunities. It's one of the largest research facilities in the Pacific Islands. It has the huge collection. Hamilton Library is one of the biggest research collections in the entire Pacific region. So anyway, so I decided to go to Hawaii and pursue my studies here. And then that's when I've ended up joining the master's program in Pacific Island Studies at first, and then after that I continued. I wanted to continue on, really get all the way and do a PhD, and which I'm doing right now in political science. So it's just a short bio, and I guess might explain a little bit what drove me to kind of do what I'm doing.
What did your master's research cover? What was that about?
Yeah, so my master's thesis was a kind of comparative study of, I guess, kind of the general topic around independence movements in Hawaii, Tahiti, and Rapa Nui. It was those three Eastern Polynesian islands. I mean, for those of you who are not familiar, Tahiti, as French Polynesia, is a French so-called overseas territory, more or less a colony. Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, is a colony, or, well, something a colonized place by Chile. And then, of course, Hawaii, we all know, is occupied by the United States. So you have a kind of three different kind of foreign powers and three different native communities, peoples resisting to some extent in each of those three countries. And so I found it fascinating because I had done a lot of research in Tahiti, as I told you, even before coming to Hawaii. I also had met some people on Rapa Nui and had traveled there a few times. And so I was really fascinated in looking at the compare and contrast those three islands. And so I looked into all of the history, like kind of what led to those places being colonized or occupied, and then also what kind of movements are there well, I mean, I wouldn't say currently because it's already a couple of years ago, but I mean, what kind of movements were there in the early 2000s, and what's the strategies that are being pursued, and kind of an analysis what actually is, in terms of international law, what's the political status of those territories, what kind of strategies make sense. I mean, pretty much in each territory there's different movements doing all kind of things, but so yeah, that was my master's
So
thesis.
before you came to Hawaii, did you know that Hawaii was an occupied place? Or was that something that you learned subsequently?
Well, not in those terms of occupied. I wasn't really clear about that. I knew that there was something wrong here in terms of historical grievances. I knew that there was, I saw it just like, at that time I wasn't clear about the distinction between colonization and occupation. So if anything, I knew is Hawaii was under some kind of foreign rule. It was, I knew that there was, from my previous study then, I knew that there was resistance in the 1800s. I knew that the Queen was overthrown illegally. I had read the Apology Bill. I had I was kind of roughly aware of the events that happened, and I knew that there was a movement for independence, or whatever you want to call it, for sovereignty in Hawaii. So I knew all of this. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't like most of the average American tourists who come here and then suddenly, wow, I thought this is the 50th state. How come you guys don't like to be part of America? No, I knew a lot about kind of resistance going on, but I guess the legal structure wasn't that clear before I did my research.
It's clear now?
Details. No, I think now it's pretty. It is
no,
pretty
it's
clear.
to you. I was wondering, to you, is it clear
course,
now?
Yeah. No, I think ever since I did my master's research, and especially I think that comparison really helped a lot to understand, because before I just heard people people say, oh, Hawaii is occupied, other people say, no, Hawaii is colonized, and they were arguing with each other, and it wasn't clear what's really the issue. Now I think after doing that comparison with Tahiti and Rapa Nui, I became much clearer about that Hawaii is occupied and not colonized, and whereas those places are colonized, and so I think that this comparative research really helped me to understand the nuances of those different
history.
History,
yeah. Okay. And then after you got your MA, you moved on to do your research, which is really what we want to talk about today as well.
Yeah, of course.
And the research focused on what?
Okay, well, my research for my PhD is somewhat different. I wanted to. Okay, so that the master's was kind of, I guess, selective for three places, and trying to cover the entire history. As much as it's relevant. Now for my PhD, I'm doing something else. I'm trying to just focus on one period in history, but look into the entire Pacific region, like all archipelagos, which is in itself a huge project. But I'm trying to kind of just cut it down by just focusing on one particular area. Historical
period.
era.
What
era? Yeah.
Period.
And and what I'm looking at is I'm looking at state formation processes as they happened in roughly the period between, well, let's call it Western encounter or Western contact and colonial or imperial takeover of those places. So pretty much anything that happened when there was Western contact was there, but there was no formal colonizer or formal occupier, or those countries were independent, they were free of foreign political domination. And I thought, I found these periods really interesting, because that's when you see I guess processes of state building, nation building and modernization happening without being really imposed from the outside, like they are under colonial rule or under any kind of foreign rule, but how how native societies are trying to cope with this kind of new situation where you have Westerners coming, you have Western diseases, you have all these kind of things. Some of them are negative, others are positive. I'm pretty sure many people were happy to have iron tools instead of stone tools, and either way, different new technologies and new things coming. And then how did people cope with this in terms of political structure? So it's in poli sci. I'm not looking at everything, and but just mainly on the political structure, like how did those native governing systems become transformed into nation states. And of course here in Hawaii we have, I guess, probably the most, or maybe the most sophisticated or the most complete process of that happening very early on with the constitutional monarchy, with international recognition. But in other places in the Pacific, there's almost each of these archipelagos, there's a kind of a same dynamics happening. People are certain leading traditional leaders, chiefs, kings are trying to consolidate power. At the same time, they're also trying to constitutionalize and modernize their governance, and especially because Hawaii is already there since the 1840s. Hawaii really then serves as a model. Like I found countless evidence of other Polynesian and Pacific Island leaders trying to emulate the Hawaiian model and to create kind of a nation state along those lines. So that's my PhD research that I'm doing right now.
So far, what have you learned? I'm just going to like pull it out of you, right? Piece by piece.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've learned a lot of things. I mean, I guess to make like maybe 3 or 4 main points that I found out, or that you know, again, I don't want to necessarily claim credit for like finding something that was never there. I mean, I was just saying that because of my research, a few things became clearer to me. Let's put it this way, because I don't want to claim to have like, you know, discovered, you know, revolutionary wise discovered something that was never there. But I mean,
well, think of it this way: most people don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know anything. I'm going to ask you the question that the ordinary man in the street would ask, like, what the heck are you talking about? So, you know, start from zero.
Okay, so I think one thing that's really interesting and that's important to understand is in order to understand how these specific societies were changed, or like were modernized, or hybridized is another word I use, in the 19th century, you first need to understand what really these societies and these political systems were before. So I think it's really, you can't really start from scratch in the sense of, because then you get into this kind of Western Eurocentric kind of thing. Well, these are savages and whatever, and then the Western civilization comes and everything is great. Now, of course, we all know this is nonsense. So we have to look at what kind of systems of governance were there. How would those systems of governance actually work? And once they were confronted with that Western contact, and then how were they modified to actually make them, I guess, more suitable to move forward as a modern nation? And I think if you look at this, really the Hawaiian Islands stand out among all the other Pacific nations. Because in the Hawaiian Islands you had something that anthropologists or archaeologists have called a so-called primary state. So you had a very centralized system of governance that most other Polynesian islands didn't have in their sense. It had developed, like, you know, centuries ago. I mean, people like Maili Kukahi on this island, who reordered the land structure, created the Ahupua'a system on this island, for example. Umi, the famous chief Umi or king, maybe even more properly called, of Hawaii Island, who probably for the first time unified the entire Hawaii Island, which is, I mean, for a society without modern technology, it's a huge area to have all of Big Island under one rule. So I think this kind of previous centralization of power and kind of foundation of kind of state-like entities on each of the Hawaiian Islands really enormously facilitated the Hawaiian Kingdom being formed as a state, as a modern nation state. And I think most other Pacific Island countries, they didn't have that. They had very kind of small, decentralized local chiefdoms that, you know, worked probably comparatively well for everybody for millennia. But then once that Western influence came, and then with it that need to have a strong native state to resist those tides of colonization and imperialism, they were in a, I guess, harder situation, because they didn't have the I guess this kind of they didn't have a groundwork already that existed in their native societies that could be easily transformed into a modern nation state. Whereas in Hawaii, all of this was there. I think to some extent in Tonga too, and that's why we probably have Tonga as another pretty stable, centralized Pacific nation state that was never really colonized. So probably Hawaii and Tonga are more like the exceptional cases, whereas the rest of the Pacific had a hard time to create kind of modern nation states because of that. So I think this is one of the main findings. And then the second one, I guess, based on that, is that, as I said, the Hawaiian Kingdom was really the only of those nation states that. And I don't say it to be disrespectful to the others, but I mean, just in terms of as a historical fact, Hawaii already having all this kind of internal groundwork, really very quickly developed into a kind of recognizable modern state much earlier than the others, and then being recognized as early as 1843, having unequal treaties cancelled in 1858, which is kind of the, I mean, those two dates are really important in my opinion. And so with that situation, Hawaii really was able to, kind of get into this unique situation of totally entering the Western family of nations as the first ever non-Western state, even before the Asian countries, even before Japan and China and those places that were certainly not powerless. I mean, they were obviously powerful. I mean, China and Japan, but they weren't able to be recognized as quickly as Hawaii. So Hawaii really stands out, and then that then explains why in other places like Fiji, like Tonga, like Samoa, it was. I mean, generally people were looking up to Hawaii and seeing as a model. They said, well, more kind of in a sense of like, I mean, these guys they look like us, but see what they're doing. They're actually having embassies all over the world. They're like going on, they're being invited to Queen Victoria's jubilees. So I mean, if they can do that, we should do that too. And we should actually strive for, to do the same thing. We should get our internal stuff together, create a centralized government, and then create a constitutional monarchy among the lines of what they have in Hawaii. So that's, I mean, this model character of Hawaii for the other islands is really something that is, I think, essential in my research too.
You know what that tells me? I'm just interrupting you.
Of course. Yeah, sorry.
Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Our civic club has, since the time we formed in 2003, tried to honor our kupuna for the work that it has, they've done, and we've considered the kupuna actually of those days as laying the foundation. And it just occurred to me that, as a matter of fact, that's way before them. We have kupuna who go way back, who actually laid a particular foundation that allowed certain things to happen. And so what you're saying is that at the time when Hawaii had an opportunity to become a nation state, that the movement towards that had been growing for a long time. Nobody knew, right?
Oh, yes.
So a foundation being laid so that when the time came for Hawaii to meet that challenge, it was ready to roll, whereas other Pacific countries or nations weren't, right?
That's true. That's true.
I'm just saying that because I think that reenactment is a big deal, and that in many ways we are today as were our ancestors just over 100 years ago, kind of reenacting something that had occurred way before that. We're kind of like in the flow. Just wanted to say that. It may not have anything to do with anything, but it's how I'm perceiving what you're saying.
No, I mean, it definitely has, and you feel, and that's the interesting thing. If you look into and that's why I think that's where like all the other Hawaiian sources come in that are such an important, I mean, that's really important to be used by modern researchers now, that you see constant reference in the newspapers, especially in newspapers. I mean, I guess that's the most durable kind of way of archiving those things, but probably even more so in public speeches that were some of them are written down in newspapers, others probably weren't. But if you look at the Hawaiian language discourses during that time, especially during the time of the overthrow, I mean, there's constant reference to the foundations for the kingdom. I mean, there's constant reference to what happened in 1843, to La Ku'oko'a, to the recognition, to La Ho'iho'i'ea, which we're going to have soon again.
On Saturday,
On Saturday, So, I mean, but not only that, there's also constant reference back to the pre-Western, or like the as Kanalo Young would say, Oiwi Wale period of Hawaiian history before Western encounter, and especially the kind of I guess the chronicles of the royal dynasties of each of those islands. I mean, I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, I would assume that just from the newspapers and from everything, I think most people were probably familiar with such names as Umi, such names as Maili Kukahi, they were not something in the distant past that, like, you know, like whatever, nobody really cares about, but it was, or like maybe some, you know, like English people talk about the Anglo-Saxon tribes as something like way back when, and nobody really cares about it anymore. But no, I think people were really aware of, especially those kind of those dynastic histories of the different island kingdoms, and how important their pursuits and their I guess political processes of well, actually state building or nation building. I would say Maeli Kukahi was a state builder, and so was Umi, so was Pi'ilani on Maui, and so I think the awareness of that was there, of that foundation, again of both foundations, of the native foundation way back when, generations ago, and also of the foundation of the kind of westernized nation state that was 43 and so yeah,
I love it because I think that's, well, it says to me, and I should say to every other Hawaiian person, we have inherited a particular bent, you might say, that was laid down who knows when, and that we carry forth in different ways through time, still doing the same thing. It's good, makes me feel kind of rooted.
True.
I like it more.
You know, the other thing I think that's really important, and that's that you know, just to get also to the topic of relevance, is that what's so fascinating too about it is that there was really this idea of solidarity among at least the leaders, the government leaders here. That, I mean, them being aware that the rest of the Pacific wanted to emulate Hawaii and wanted to create nation states like in Hawaii. I mean, the Hawaiian Kingdom wanted to help them. They wanted, and not, well, I mean, I guess foreign policy is never without any of their own interest. Obviously, it would be of the interest of the Hawaiian Kingdom to have allied nation states in the Southern Pacific. So I wouldn't say it was cousins, but I mean, it was definitely like something. It was I think really a policy of solidarity and of helping out those cousins.
Kekuni would love this discussion because Kekuni has consistently referred to the whole Pacific as Kamoana Nui.
Yes, it's true.
So if you look at the Pacific as a one place, and all of those islands that are sticking up here and there as those smaller places where our cousins live, we're connected by the Pacific. That's the road, right? And so that they're always nearby. You can always visit. Just a different way to look at unification as opposed to separation. Not separated by distance and ocean, but unified by the fact that we have the same road. Yeah? Exactly.
No, totally. I couldn't agree more with that. And I mean, you see like quite a few examples of Hawaiian Kingdom foreign policy they were really built off of that discourse, and actually like trying to you know, I mean, what would I say? Well, I mean, to really try to you know, to build a unified Oceania, but not just that, but I mean, to first kind of help building the foundations by really strengthening each of these native governments in the South Pacific, and then having them all kind of federated. That has been the idea of I think Hawaiian foreign policy. And not just by King Kalakaua. I know there's a lot of people who are somewhat semi-aware that Kalakaua pursued that kind of policy, and it's true. And Kalakaua is, you know, I mean, I'm nothing against him. Maybe one of the most visionary mo'i that the kingdom had. But that's actually that's a constant kind of strain of mana'o in Hawaiian foreign policy all the way since Kauikeauli's time. So you had all the way back in Kauikeauli's time, you had this idea of, I mean, they discussed it in the Privy Council even about that Hawaii should be the model and the lead. I mean, well, should be the model, the leading nation, but also the I guess an
example of what people can rise
for the Pacific,
to,
but also somebody who would help the rest of the Pacific. So you had this kind of, I mean, I guess. Back in the 50s already, you had a Hawaiian consul in Sydney by the name of St. Julian, who was constantly in communication with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wiley, here in Honolulu, and he was actually feeding all this information to all these leading chiefs in Tonga, in Fiji, and in Samoa. And then so starting from the 50s, there was this interest. I mean, I guess this mutual interest. There was this interest by those leaders to learn from Hawaii, and there was also this interest by Hawaii itself to promote itself as a model and to foster strong native governments in each of those islands. So it goes back to the 1850s. Then we get, when we come to the 60s, it intensifies more and more, 70s. And then in the 80s, actually, King Kalakaua sends a warship to Samoa. That's the famous episode with the Kaimiloa, that Hawaiian warship that was being sent down to Samoa. Hawaii sent John Bush, who was also one of the famous leaders of the resistance against annexation of, I think he was in Hawaiiʻs, I think, he was a member of one of the leading members of, he's on the big group picture of Hawaiiʻs with Cummins in the middle, and there's Nawahi and there's Bush someplace. So Bush, like this famous Hawaiian politician, newspaperman, journalist, he was commissioned by King Kalakaua to be the ambassador at large to Tonga, Samoa, and other Polynesian islands, and he was sent down to Samoa to help the Samoan government, which was kind of, I guess, unstable in both ways. It was under siege by Western imperialists, but it was also under siege by, I guess, rebelling, or I mean, by dissenting factions in Samoa that were trying to create their own Samoan state. So it was kind of pretty in a precarious situation. But Hawaii wanted to help the Samoans to first of all figure out their internal problems, unify their own government, have their own strong government, and then be able to fend off Western imperialism. And
so unification,
yeah,
for the express purpose of defending against what they saw was coming.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
that's definitely one of the main.
Did Kalakaua use the term foreign policy when he made reference to the other Pacific nations? Was that term being used back then?
Well, I mean,
only because you mentioned it several times,
well,
I wondered.
It's always hard to to make those statements very clearly, because first of all, we have to deal with two different official languages. Yeah, we have Hawaiian and English. Both of them were used quite, especially in the later 19th century. Most people, especially in the higher echelons of local politics in Hawaii, were pretty much bilingual. And so we have a lot of documents both in English and in Hawaiian. I guess foreign policy in that sense that all of this was under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was doing those things, was sending people to, so in that sense it was foreign policy. At the same time, it is also true that if you look at the discourse that they were saying, they were constantly referring to those other Polynesian people as their cousins, as their relatives. So in that sense, it was probably a different type of foreign policy than that would be, let's say, made towards European powers. So I'm pretty sure between communicating, let's say, with the King of Belgium and between communicating with the King of Samoa or the King of Tonga, I'm pretty sure there was a different kind of feeling that went with it. So in that sense, I see where you're coming from, and I see why it might be useful to distinguish a little bit more. Yeah,
because family's on one side, and then not family on the other side, right? Okay, just checking.
But I mean, family was definitely, in that sense, was more than just what we now consider Polynesia, because I know that the way Kalakaua, for example, looked at other Austronesian-speaking peoples, especially like in what is today Malaysia and Indonesia, he considered them their cousins too, because of the similarities in languages. When Kalakaua met with the Sultan of Johor, which is now part of Malaysia, he also considered him his brother, and he said, "This is like we are brothers. We are oceanic brothers."
So maybe it was more than just a language thing then? Would it have been to do with basically how people looked?
Possibly too. I mean, especially there's a little funny little anecdote when Kalakaua wrote in his diary when he met the Sultan of Johor. He said that this guy looks just like Leleiohoku. Not his younger brother, but the other, the first Leleiohoku, the first, who had passed away already by that time. And it's interesting. Like I looked at the pictures, and actually, I can see where he was coming from. So yeah, definitely the looks, made an impact too. I mean, I think same thing in Thailand, which I mean, obviously Thai is not an Austroasian language. There's not that linguistic connection, but I think he considered some of the Thai people to be kind of relatives too, because some of them look somewhat similar, I guess, to Polynesians too. So, yeah, there was probably, I mean...
There was a brotherhood growing. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well,
I know. I don't know anything. I'm learning from you.
I mean, if you look at that at the global situation in the late 1800s, I mean, you have this kind of Western imperialism kind of really encroaching on more and more parts of the world. You see, like, you know, one country being gobbled up, or one area that wasn't, if it wasn't kind of a country in the modern sense, but I mean, you had, you know, the Western powers kind of, you know, colonizing more and more, and in the Pacific too, like one archipelago after another was being grabbed, and then, you know, the Germans, the British, the French, Africa. You had all these conferences where they like drew the lines on the maps to like divide Africa. And then Asia too. I mean, Britain waged like really costly wars to conquer Burma in the 1880s. The French colonized, you know, Indochina, Vietnam, and then between all of this, there was a few countries who were able to survive, and they were able to, like non-Western countries that were able to get some kind of recognition, maybe not as high level as the Hawaiian Kingdom that got the full all the way in 1843, but there were some countries like Japan, Thailand, Madagascar, Ethiopia, like there was quite Iran, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. So there were a few countries that were able to withstand this and not become colonized. And so I think what Kalakaua realized, maybe he was even the first to fully realize it in that sense, is that this is something that needs to be like these. I mean, we can only stop that wave of Western imperialism if all these nations that are non-Western and potentially victims of colonization but still independent, if they all bond together and create kind of a common front to protect at least what they have left. And I think that's why he was so interested in joining together with Asian countries like Japan, with Thailand and others, but also then in the I mean, I guess internationally much weaker, but even more emotionally closer to Hawaii, because they spoke really similar languages in Polynesia, like Samoa, Tonga, and other places. So I think, yeah, that's this idea of kind of pan-native or pan. I mean, I don't even know what the term for it, but I mean, like non-Western countries trying to bond together. There was probably King Kalakaua who first formulated it, and I know later it was picked up under the banner of Pan-Asianism by Asian nationalist leaders, you know, like, I mean, by obviously Japan, and then they've kind of started using it for their own imperial purposes to some extent, but then in China, you know, anti-colonial nationalists like Jose Rizal in the Philippines, Aguinaldo. So that Pan-Asianism in the early 1900s becomes this kind of, you know, kind of global thing. Then you have Gandhi in India, and then it kind of anti-colonialism starts very early in some Asian places. But I think before that even started, King Kalakaua had the same vision, like in the 1880s, when most of the Asian countries were still totally on their own and not really thinking in those terms yet. But so I think Kalakaua was in that sense really ahead of his time, which he was in many ways.
Very cool. I was going to ask you a question, and then I forgot what it was because I started listening to you and I lost that. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can kind of like fast forward a little bit, because I think that your research gives us something to think about in terms of the future. Mm-hmm. We're in interesting times. Yes. And things definitely are happening now in Hawaii and in other places about Hawaii. And I wondered if you might comment on whether or not you have some insights about the future based on your research. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, it's always hard to predict the future, and I don't want to do that, and I think that's not really the role of a political scientist to
and that's not my question. The future. I'm not asking you to predict. Just
but I mean, it's true that I mean, I definitely see this research that I'm doing to be relevant for the future, or for the present and the future. Mm-hmm. I am not doing this as an exercise in history. I'm also not in the history department, but even, this is not meant to be derogatory towards historians, but I mean, there are some historians sometimes who seem to be just interested in the facts of the past without connecting them to the, I mean, not everyone, but
relevance, that's what we're talking about.
Tend to that, but I mean, I'm definitely want to make this really relevant to the present and the future, and so I think right now we are seeing a lot of things in the Pacific that is moving almost kind of along the same lines that things were moving back in the 1800s. So it's like history repeating itself.
It's the reenactment. That's what we call it.
It's true, no, exactly,
yeah.
And that's so. Some of you, well, I mean, and I know you're familiar with Epeli Hau'ofa. I'm not sure how many people in the audience are, but Epeli Hau'ofa is he passed away, I think, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. He was one of the leading, I think, one of the most brilliant modern intellectuals of the Pacific Islands, and he wrote this essay, Our Sea of Islands, in 1993. He's from Tonga, anthropologist, and I don't know what else he was a center. He was their director at Center for the Oceania Center for Culture and the Arts in the University of the South Pacific in Suva for a long time. And he formulated that essay, Our Sea of Islands, where he kind of well, to summarize it, he was telling Pacific Islanders to be more proud of their history, in the sense of try to change the perception of Pacific Islands, instead of this kind of Western colonial perspective where they're just small little specks of lost places in the middle of the ocean that are not really able to survive by themselves, that need constantly foreign aid and blah blah blah, but instead to go back to what was there before, that there was actually that actually Oceania is a vast maritime civilization that spanned like 1/3 of the globe, and that actually the islands are only parts of it, and you need to look at the ocean as a whole. So I mean that, but what's interesting about this is that when he wrote this actually not while he was on a canoe or something. Like, I mean, you might think about this is somebody who maybe participated in this renewal of voyaging, and then he got this idea. No, actually he didn't. He had this vision out of all places in the middle of the largest island of tropical Polynesia, which is the big island of Hawaii. He was driving the road between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, and he saw those two mountains, and then he thought about that. Now, interestingly enough, he is, and I'm not sure how much you know about it, he was right next, I mean, well, not right next, but I mean, this is also the place that's relatively close to where Ahu'aumi stands, that Heiau Te Umi built after he unified all of the big island into one kingdom in the, whatever, 1500s or something. So, I mean, I see it as, Epeli Hau'ofa, he was almost like, I see him as like a spokesperson for the Hawaiian Kingdom, before he even realized that was the case, before our current discourse about the occupation of the kingdom was even really relevant. I mean, that prevalent in Hawaii in 1993. It was just slowly getting there. So I think if you look at Epeli Hau'ofa and what he's, not just himself, but what he stands for, this kind of new idea of kind of oceanic, like this kind of regaining of kind of a kind of national pride and national consciousness of kind of a pan-oceanic consciousness that's rising everywhere. And I guess revival of voyaging is one aspect of it. Hokule are now circling the world and everything. Now, that is in some sense really can be linked back to what I am researching about, to this visionary policy of the Hawaiian Kingdom to unify Oceania under some kind of, I guess, Hawaiian leadership. But well, I mean, the main point is to strengthen the archipelagos of Oceania, and declare them, declare Western imperialism irrelevant for them, and actually strengthen them based on what Oceania itself has to offer. And so I think in that sense, this kind of pan-Pacific discourse that you increasingly find nowadays, in some sense goes back to that, and some people might not be aware of it too much, but yeah, it's like I'm seeing this kind of reenactment constantly in that sense.
I can relate. Basically, Kalemaileali'i Hawaiian Civic Club, which is sponsoring this, is big into the idea of reenacting history. I talked with John Kaimikawa long before he passed about performance, because I saw him and his halau, I think it was in the year 2000 or 2001, I forget. They came to Mauna Ala at 11:30 at night. There was a gathering, and his halau did what I called a performance. They danced and only about Kalepo Popolo. I think that's what it was. Were you here? I don't know if you were here.
No, I don't.
Anyway,
Might have been before my time.
The story was about these two stones, one on top of the other, and a big wave comes in the top stone, which is the ali'i, flips, and the bottom stone, which is the people, is stuck, is wedged in the ground. It doesn't move. And then the wave leaves, and what remains is the people. And so I asked him, you know, what is that? And he said, we don't do performance, we do reenactments. And when you do a reenactment, every action is sacred. These things have been done before, and what we do is kind of like, what do you call, the Last Supper or whatever in the Catholic Church. It's an affirmation that history continues on, and we are making it even as we do whatever it is that we do. And I thought, wow, man, it is a really good way to look at how we understand history and what we do about it. So the honoring of place and time and persons really is about bringing all those things that happen right here. It's making them present. The reenactment thing is about making all of that present right here, right? So when you're talking about Kalakaua and his vision and his efforts at doing that, making all of those things from history come forward and be done right now as a reenactment, I think of that as extremely positive, because it's still going. I mean, it's still happening, right?
No, it is, definitely.
So did you know that when you were doing any of your research? Did it ever occur to you that what you were doing was uncovering this thread that somehow will manifest when your book comes out?
Maybe not as clearly. I mean, I always wanted to. I mean, I didn't start this as just an exercise in history. I mean, I was always aware that, you know, I saw it that way. I saw it. I started looking at, you know, most historians or most kind of Pacific scholars, it's always like about it. It's always about this kind of triple. What's the term? I mean, dichotomy, trichotomy, or whatever you call it. Like, it's like those three essays. It's like the pre-colonial time, the colonial time, and the post-colonial time. I guess then that already doesn't really fit for Hawaii, which was never colonized, as we know. And then there's places who are still not decolonized, like Tahiti or Rapa Nui. So there already it throws it off. But then what throws it even more off is that there was what they call pre-colonial. Is usually they mean the pre-Western contact, and then that whole time between Western contact and colonization or occupation, that just gets lost. That gets lost in this discourse. And then so I was thinking, no, this is like this part of the history is actually for each Pacific archipelago is really crucial for the formation of national consciousness. If people are aware of it today or not, but it is. And that's why I thought that's why I wanted to study this. I think this is kind of the perspective that I was coming from. So I was already aware of that this is something that is kind of relevant for today. Now, of course, I think what has changed, what has reinforced is this kind of this kind of direct reenactment idea like that. I didn't really think about it from that same perspective, that in terms of kind of Pacific regionalism being like a direct successor to what Kalakaua had in mind. I think some of that, I guess, came during the research. But so, yeah, to answer your question partly, but not fully.
That's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I struggle. You know, I'm not really sure myself how to speak about things. So I don't have the vocabulary to do it, and I didn't do your research, so I can't describe exactly what I think you're saying. But what I think you're saying is that if Pacific peoples are able to think of ourselves as not pre-colonial, colonial, or post-colonial, we win. And basically, because we were there before those terms were invented, and what the hell? Somebody else is inventing those terms to use to apply to us so that they can better understand what happened in our history. So there's an opportunity to take our history and describe it however we want to, and not using those terms, even though we weren't colonized. And those terms still exist, you know, and it's comfortable for other people to use them to describe eras in history, because there's not another word. That we have to expand our vocabulary, do more. What other things do you want to share about this work that you're doing that we haven't covered? I think you did say you had like 4 or 5 different points, and I think we got to number 3.
Well, I mean, I have, I mean, I definitely have a lot of points, and it's all kind of hard where to stop and where to.
That's okay. Just keep going until I tell you run out of time.
Maybe a little bit off the main topic, but it's still like I came across it in my research. I mean, I think what's really is still undervalued to some extent is the international connection of Hawaii, of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And again, I mean, both in terms of the Pacific connections, but also with really the rest of the world. And I mean, I already covered the other Polynesian islands. I covered to some extent the Asian places, even though I would actually like to add an important thing about Asia, namely the Hawaiian influence on China, which is like tremendous, and people don't really realize that, because the person that is considered the founding father of China, something like George Washington for the U.S., Sun Yat-sen, he went to school in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and he got all his ideas of kind of political modernization. He got them from the Hawaiian Kingdom. I mean, later he added on by being schooled in Japan as well, and being schooled in Hong Kong. So he saw both the British colonial system, and he saw the, I guess, independent, non-Western modernizing system in Japan. But ultimately, where he actually first got the ideas from of how to reform a non-Western country and how to modernize without being colonized, he learned it here in Hawaii. So that's something I think that I just kind of accidentally came across, and I'm not a scholar of China. I don't speak Chinese, but I guess my focus is Polynesia and Pacific, and not really continental Asia. But I still want to mention it in half a chapter or so, because I think it's really important. It shows that the Hawaiian Kingdom was a model even for countries that were like 100 times bigger than it, like as I said with China. But then again, to go back to my own heritage as a German, which enables me to read German fluently. So,
and you speak multiple languages, don't you?
Yeah, I speak several. Well, German is my first language, English, French, pretty much fluently, and Hawaiian to some extent. Maybe I wouldn't call it fluently, but I mean enough to read the historical sources in Hawaiian, and then Tahitian kind of a similar level. And then I've kind of, understand bits and pieces of other Polynesian languages too. I took a semester of Tongan and 2 semesters of Samoan, which I don't, I'm nowhere near like really speaking those languages, but I can use some of the source materials too. So
very helpful in gathering data.
Oh no, for sure, and it is. I mean, it is. I think it is important that there needs to be much more multilingual research on Hawaii, because a lot of the really important information about the Hawaiian Kingdom is not just in English and in Hawaii. I mean, for the longest time, people were even thinking they could do. I mean, there was a guy named Kuykendall who, I don't want to disrespect him totally, because there's still a lot of. I use his books quite a lot because he did a lot of very diligent work. But he thought seriously to write a history of the Hawaiian Kingdom without using the Hawaiian language. That's kind of ridiculous to me. Thankfully, we're over that period now. Now, pretty much everybody who wants to do research on Hawaiian history now has to. It more and more becomes the standard that those people have to read Hawaiian sources. So that's a good thing. But I would argue more research needs to be done in even other languages. Just newspapers alone, we had during the kingdom there were newspapers in 5 languages in the Hawaiian kingdom. There was Hawaiian newspapers, English newspapers, Portuguese newspapers, Chinese newspapers, and Japanese newspapers. So so we have 2 languages covered now, with most historians speaking English and Hawaiian. But what about the 3 others? Who has really analyzed those 3 other newspapers and what they say about
somebody else's dissertation?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And then German. Well, we didn't have a German language newspaper here, and there wasn't really significant, I guess, sources produced here that were only in German, because most people who were, if they came to Hawaii, they spoke probably English or Hawaiian. But if they were of German ancestry, but we have resources being written by German visitors or even German, scientists interested in Hawaii who publish stuff back in Germany. That is, some of it is tremendously interesting. And I came across just 2 little things that I wanted to share. One is a map that was drawn in 1858 that shows the Hawaiian kingdom actually labeled as it's called Reich Kamehamehas, and Reich in German means something like an empire. So it's like Kamehameha's empire, and it puts Hawaii. It just reinforces what I already knew, but it's still interesting. It's nice to see a contemporary source. So you have all of the 5 or 6 big imperial powers: England, Britain, Russia, Spain, and the Netherlands. They are color coded with whatever they, the Dutch have Indonesia, the French have Tahiti, and so on and so forth. The British have India, New Zealand, Australia. And you have that same system of color coding. One of the six imperial, quote unquote, imperial powers in the Pacific is Hawaii. So that's the interesting thing. So you have like this full acknowledgement of Hawaii as one of the big players in the Pacific by this German cartographer. So I thought that was really nice to see. Then another thing is, in the 1870s there was a German traveler, Count Graf Reinhold von Anrep-Elmt, like a German count, like lower nobility. Obviously a rich guy, so he could afford to travel around the world, do all kind of things. And he wrote his first trip was in his first, I guess, station in his trip around the world was in, or one of it was in Hawaii. He wrote a whole book about that stay in Hawaii. There's so much information there. I mean, he was not just a traveler who liked the landscapes. It looks like he went to each government department to get their figures, their statistics. He interviewed everybody. Sometimes he got Hawaiian names wrong, but the important thing is he documented so much about the kingdom, how it works, the bureaucracy, and he wrote something that I wasn't aware of from any of the sources I knew about the healthcare system. Hawaii had a healthcare system that was, at the absolute cutting edge during that time. They had a foreign tourist travel insurance system. So if you came to Hawaii as a foreign visitor, before you were allowed to enter Hawaii, you had to pay $2 into that for the Queen's Hospital Fund, so that you as a visitor, if you get sick, then you could get free health care in the Queen's Hospital during your stay. If after 1 month of stay you didn't get sick, then you can collect those $2 again by the time you leave the country. Well, if you get sick, then the $2 are gone. But these are extremely modern.
Sounds progressive to me.
I don't know any other country who had such a system in the 1880s. Just a little anecdote to throw it in there. But this is some of the stuff that you learn if you read foreign sources that are published about Hawaii. So again, this is just German, and I read some French resources where I found some interesting things too. But I can only imagine, somebody who reads Spanish goes through all the archives in Spain, in all the Latin American countries that had diplomatic relations with Hawaii. Maybe you find hundreds of things in Spanish. Someone reads Russian, maybe. Russia had very close relations to the Hawaiian kingdom. I don't know how much is in the archives of Moscow about Hawaii that we don't even know about. So, that's why I would encourage anybody who has a foreign language skill with any of the languages that the kingdom had any kind of relations with, and you're interested in and passionate about the things that I am and that Lynette is, and people here are, please go ahead and do some research for us. Go to some country and go to their archives to look at all these things.
I think it's a really good plug for people who are in the grad program.
Mm-hmm.
Who aren't really sure yet what they want their focus to be, but you're right, if they have a skill already,
mm-hmm.
if you speak a foreign language and you know that we've had treaties with those countries whose languages you speak, do it. I think it's wonderful. Any last words as we run out of time?
Well, I thank you for the invitation, and I'm glad I could share some of my research here. Again, anybody who, I would only encourage anybody who to do more research. We have, what I have been doing, what the other people who have been on this show have been doing is all, I would say, interesting research and great research, but it's only the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And any researcher, that anybody who is passionate, especially like grad students who are thinking about getting a PhD or getting an MA, and think about it, they don't know exactly what they're doing yet. I would encourage anybody to do some kind of Hawaiian Kingdom related research, either internationally, and if you just speak English and Hawaiian and you don't have these foreign languages, same thing. The newspapers are only, there's so many Hawaiian newspapers that have still not really been read by modern researchers. There's tons of archival documents. There's just so much out here, and again, I encourage everybody to do more research.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lorenz, for joining us, and thank you to our watching audience for hanging in. But wow, this is really interesting. I learned a lot. Thanks for that. Maybe you have more you may want to share at some future time. I'm Lynette Cruz for Issues That Matter. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Lorenz. I was like, who knew? I don't know anything, but I'm learning from you. And this is Issues That Matter. We'll be seeing you again because we have another show coming up, and I'm not even sure who that's going to be. But thank you, and see you again. Thanks.
Welcome.